We are back. New York Mets baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko. My co-host Marty Rose is on assignment. I'm blessed to have Mike Duffy Dyer, retired journalist, Long Island Press, among other newspapers. How are you, sir?
Very good, Ralph. Looks like we are having another miracle in Corona, Queens. Huh?
I don't know what that miracle can be, because from day to day it's a miracle or a disaster. This is the most mercuric team I've ever been a fan of. And
well, you remember the 1973 Mets, who were in last place in August, and they somehow got into the World Series and made it Game 7.
That's absolutely true.
It ain't over till it's over.
You mentioned 73. It was the only year I got to see a World Series game in my whole life, even though I grew up in New York and they played it in my backyard. Never saw one as a kid. Saw the sixth game between the A's and our beloved Mets. And the 73 Mets were at least my second favorite team of all time, and probably my favorite Met team. Because, yes, at the beginning of the year, they were horrible. They were hurt by injuries. Harrelson was either hurt or in the reserves early on. They had a kid named Ostraser playing shortstop. And
John Miller had a tummy ache all year, if you remember. And even Tom Seaver was hurt that year.
It wasn't.
Harry Grody had problems,
But Matlock came into his own, and Kuzman was still going strong, and they got some great Ray Sadecki, Bill Parker stuff out of the bullpen. And
they had the immortal manager named Yogi Berra.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it was my question to Yogi that gave you the answer. It ain't over till it's over.
Right.
Third week in August.
What time is it? What time is it, Yogi? He says, "You mean right now?" You got to know him as a journalist. What were you impressed by?
That's a good question. I wish I had a good answer for you, because he followed the greatest Met manager of all time, and the late Gil Hodges, who had everybody's respect, and that was his World War II drilling, and of course Yogi was in the Navy in World War II, but he didn't seem to have the same understanding of the players that Gilly had, and they were in last place. They had 5 teams ahead of them in third week in August, when I suggested that Bud Harrelson be moved up in the lineup because he couldn't bunt and he couldn't steal, batting in 8th spot in the lineup. And I said, after all, the season's over next month, and it doesn't matter. And that's when Yogi turned around at me, turned red in the face, said, "You want to run this team?" Because I was a young guy back then. And then he rattled off all the guys who were getting healthy. And in the middle, he said, "And it ain't over till it's over." Well, of course, nobody knew what that meant since they were in last. But a couple of weeks later, we did learn, because they did pass the Cardinals and the Expos and the Pirates and the Cubs and the Phillies, and finally clinched first place the day after the season officially ended. So that was, then they played the Reds and beat them in 5 games, and then they took on the powerful Oakland A's with Catfish and Reggie and Joe Rudy, and they scared the A's, because the Mets were up 3-2 after 5, but lost the last 2 games in Oakland. But as far as Yogi, he got credit for that, and I think probably more credit goes to the players.
To tell you how badly it was going at the beginning, his job was in peril. They had a poll going in the New York Post. It was not just him to fire him. It was Bob Sheffing was the GM, and people were contributing to this poll, and talk about a hard press. The New York press is really something. And I don't want this moment to get by without my mentioning that when poor Gil Hodges passed away, at the funeral, the Mets announced the press conference that they would be hiring Yogi Berra to replace him.
He was their top coach at the time.
Right. I thought that was pretty classless. And in an organization that has been classless at other times. It's not the first time, but this is right up there, and I don't want people to forget that. That was
and 4 years later, they would lose Tom Seaver and Dave Kingman and a few others, and just a knifing of the team in the middle of the season. That was the way the Mets managed back then.
It was, and there's one thing that gets lost in the history of Tom Seaver no longer being a Met. Tom Seaver was under contract and was putting pressure on to renegotiate the contract. Now, not to say that that's reason enough to get rid of him, but it was a different world back then. It was before free agency, and teams weren't used to being dictated to. And M. Donald Grant was not the guy to mess with in terms of expecting team loyalty or anything. They weren't running it like a team. That was Mrs. Payson did, but by the time it got down to Donald Grant, I think it became a dollars and cents thing more than anything else.
And then you had a guy named Dick Young of the Daily News who was leading the campaign to get rid of Tom.
Absolutely. I was thinking that exactly. And, wow. Dick Young.
The greatest baseball writer of all time, and unfortunately he went over what he should have been saying. But we owe a lot to Dick because he was the very first sports writer to go into a locker room after the game and get a story. Back in 1946 when he was covering the Dodgers in Brooklyn. And up to then, nobody ever went into a clubhouse after a game because deadlines were coming up. We didn't have the computers we have now. We had to dictate stories on the phone back to the paper, and somebody on rewrite had to take it. And that Dodger game in Brooklyn ended so quickly that he had a chance to ask Bert Schotten, who was the manager then, why he did something. And that started a whole trend now and why we all have to go into a clubhouse after a game and get our stories.
Wow, that is something I didn't know, that he's the father of all of that.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know him well on a personal level?
I like to think I knew him as well as I could, being working for another paper. But he did likes and dislikes, and one guy he disliked the most, I think, was Jimmy Rice of the Red Sox. And there was a game at Yankee Stadium, and Dick was the official scorer. And Chris Chambliss at the plate. There were 2 out. Yankees had a man on third, and Chambliss hit a little Texas leaguer over shortstop, and Rice came as hard as he could, dove for the ball, and it bounced out of his glove, and everybody else would say base hit and an RBI, and of course Dick Young, who didn't like Jim Rice, said E7, and even Chris Chambliss' wife had to call the press box to please get a hit back and an RBI, and Dick would not change. He had one thought, and he never would change his mind on it.
Well, do you have any idea why he didn't like Jim Rice?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I had no. Jim was one of the few guys who was available in the Boston clubhouse after the Bucky Dent game in '78. I think only he and Jerry Remy were available, and everybody else was ducking the press, except for Don Zimmer, who was available in the manager's office. But I always thought if you treated Jim Rice fairly, he was very good with an interview.
You bring up Don Zimmer. He was like 1 for 34, but he was the first New York Met third baseman.
He was very smart, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Just to get traded off the worst team in baseball history, who lost their first 9 games. And I remember their very first home game was on a Friday the 13th. So
now,
we should have realized what was going to happen back in 1962.
I remember who he was traded for. Do you remember?
Who was he traded for?
Cliff Cook.
Who was it? Oh, yeah, Cliff
Do you
Cook?
remember Cliff Cook?
Of course.
Oh.
I didn't know that's who he was traded for. That's real ancient history, Ralph. Right.
I know. And I could also say that Hobie Landreth was traded for Marv Thornberry, too.
I thought Hobie was traded for
a few other things besides this trivial nonsense, as my father would say, is nonsense. There's very few other things going on in my brain. Other than tomorrow I get on an Amtrak with my beloved Tally and head from California to New York, and going to have a little event for the Comfortably Zoned radio network that I founded. Going to have a little meeting up on Edgecombe in Upper New York, almost probably in Harlem. It borders on Harlem, and they have a new brush staircase that used to lead down to the old Polo Grounds. And we're going to just do a podcast from there, maybe light a candle and have folks who remember the old girl, the Polo Grounds, come by and be part of the podcast and give their memories of the Polo Grounds. So I'm excited about that. And I'm going to a neighborhood reunion. We both grew up in Queens, you and I. You were in a little more fancy area, fancy schmancy, Forest Hills. Went to Forest Hills High. I went to Newtown High School.
And arch rivals.
Division rivals. And
well, Jamaica and Newtown were the biggest rivals back then. And to me, it was almost 60 years ago. But
right. Boy, my camp, one of my camp directors, a fellow by the name of Milt Blatt, was a track coach at Jamaica High School. And you may have known him in your journalistic endeavors if you covered local sports in Queens. How'd you get into journalism? Were you a sports fan first or a journalist?
You know, I owe it to baseball cards. Back in there were no cards in the 40s because of the war and because that made a paper shortage. And in 1948. The first baseball cards came out after the war. That was a company called Bowman. And I was in the third grade going to PS13 in Elmhurst. And I memorized the backs of the cards. I knew Eddie Joost and I knew Ferris Fane and I memorized all this stuff. I became the go-to guy in sports back in the third grade. So I owe it to them. And even now I'm very proud of the sports card collection I have now, but if I hadn't read the back,
so it was sports first, and being a journalist is a result, not the other way around.
That's correct. I wanted to be a sports announcer like Mel Allen or Russ Hodges
so did I.
Some guy named Vin Scully.
Were you
we had the greatest announcers of all time right here.
Were you encouraged by your parents to do that?
No. Nobody in my family was doing that. They let me do that, and of course at Hofstra, where I went to school, I became the sports editor of the paper, and that kind of got me going. So
good.
And I had 47 years as a sports writer.
Who did you meet as a sports writer that you grew up idolizing idolizing? That's the word. If you had baseball.
Yeah, that's the easy one. Some guy in word number 24 on his back. Say hey kid, Billy Mays.
Yeah, wow.
And I remember the first time I talked to him, I said, my God, I remember back in 1954, you hit one of the hardest balls I ever hit at the Polo Grounds. You hit it over the bullpen. Remember the bullpen was in fair territory at the Polo Grounds.
Right.
And I said, you must remember that. And Willie says, no, I don't know that. And of course, he thought his greatest catch was against Bobby Morgan at Ebbs Field and not the Vic Wirtz catch in the World Series there in '54. But Willie was great, and I just felt bad for him when
was the one you were talking about. Branch Rickey wrote a note into the dugout after that catch, and he said, "Young man, that was the best catch I've ever seen, and ever hope to see. So Branch
Was Bobby Morgan or the Vic Wirtz?
The Bobby Morgan.
Oh, yeah, okay, because he really crashed into, you know how small Ebbets Field was, and he really had to go all full strong to get into it. But people don't remember that one because it was a regular season game.
You know, we hear so much about Mickey and Willie. Even though it was Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, we don't hear much about Duke Snider in comparison to those two fellows. Anything interesting that you can relate about having known or met him?
Well, Edwin Duke Snider, he's in the Hall of Fame now too, and of course he was really benefited by the Dodger lineup because everybody else in that lineup was right-handed, and the Duke was the only lefty. So most teams would start a right-handed pitcher against the Dodgers, and Snider would always have that benefit of hitting and not worrying about a curveball coming up. But he belongs right with him. But Willie was the best of the three, and he could do it all. And it's hard to believe he's 85 right now.
I know. It's hard to believe I'm 69. And what are you, about 45, the way you talk?
Yeah, about 77. Thanks, Ralph.
All right. Well, wow. You got it going. What do you do in your retirement? How do you keep it going?
I'm living in Florida, sunny Florida, waiting for a hurricane to hit us now because this is that time of the year. But no, it's great down here. The winter. I remember this first time ever I was in a pool on January 2nd. We got an outdoor pool here, and it's always 90 degrees, so it didn't matter what the temperature was outside. As long as you stayed in the pool, it was going to be 90 degrees. So but the people are great, and most of them are New Yorkers, I find out.
Yeah, I can imagine. My mother lived and my uncle both lived their last years of their life in Florida, and it is what it is. There's a lot.
We're just east of Tampa, which is a great area.
My uncle lived up in St. Pete, and my mother lived in Coral Springs, which is the west side of or the east side of the state.
Okay.
Well,
I haven't learned the state yet.
About what goes on in Florida, and do you have statements to make about anything that you see or anything in the world? This isn't, just interested in your reaction to the changes that have gone on in your lifetime.
Well, it was pretty tough back in the early 50s when you had a little black and white TV, 12 inches long, and you only got the road games of the baseball teams. And like one of the greatest games I ever listened to was back in 1968, and it was the Mets against the Houston Astros. No TV, and the game went 24 innings with Houston winning 1-0 on an Al Weiss error. People forget with the Met pitching back then. In fact, Tug McGraw worked 6 innings in relief and 3 times came out of bases loaded situations to keep the game going. But around 3:30 in the morning, I was happy Weiss made the error so I could go to sleep because, I couldn't go to sleep with the game still on, right? That's like the 1985 game against Atlanta when the game started on July 4th and ended on July 5th after 3 rain delays, and they had 19 innings with the Mets winning at 16-13, and they had to have fireworks afterwards because that was promised to anybody who was in the ballpark, even though it was 4:30 a.m. So it was those are the great games you remember,
Absolutely. Were you at the first game at Shea?
No. I was working in Albany at the time, so I didn't start covering him for the press until 1967 when I joined the press. And of course, the great Jack Lang was the beat writer for the press, and I became the backup. So I covered.
And he was the head of the sports
Secretary Treasurer of the Baseball Writers Association. Yeah.
He would call players, if I remember correctly. He was the guy who would inform guys with a phone call that they had been elected to the Hall of Fame. He had the pleasure. Am I right about that?
That is correct. Because now
All right.
they would probably, I voted 33 years for the Hall of Fame, and this last year I found out I was too old, as they got rid of a whole bunch of us beat guys because we hadn't covered a game in a recent time. Well, at my age, there aren't too many guys who would be covering full time, but the irony is I always voted for Bonds and Roger Clemens and and Sammy Sosa. I thought they belonged in the Hall of Fame, but they got rid of us because we're too old.
That's the one nice thing about podcasting. They can't get rid of us because there's no one here to get rid of, or there's no laws. We just do it, and that's kind of nice. It's different than traditional radio in the sense that you can say whatever you want, and you don't have to worry about what some sponsor thinks, and you can put things down for posterity. What would you like for posterity? This is all saved on YouTube. And
like I said, since I'm the one that got Yogi's quote, it ain't over till it's over. I told my wife when I leave this world, on the gravestone it should say, it is over, but what I'd like to have in there, but I'm not looking forward to that date, though, and they can take their time on it.
No one is. Some people are. That's and it should be an option if you are. I think Kevorkian had the right idea. If you really should be able to go out with dignity, but as you said it jokingly, I threw that in like an idiot. What can I tell you? It's been a long morning. And
we should pay tribute to the '69 Mets because a lot of our listeners here probably don't remember the circumstances that led to an amazing comeback by a team that was 35 games out of first place after the '68 season, and nobody expected much of those '69 Mets, and they were 11 and a half games out in August, and they won it by 8 over the Cubs. I mean, they just came out of nowhere, won every night, just seemed, and with boys like Cleon Jones.
Were two people that believed in spring training that they could win. They could win it all. One was Gil.
They were never a 500 team in their history. Finally, in June that year, they reached 35 and 35, and the guys were all cheering. And Seaver's the one that said, "What are you celebrating? We haven't done anything. We're just a 500 team." And of course, after that, he had his near perfect game against the Cubs, and everybody saw what was happening because from Jerry Grody and from Shamsky and Swoboda.
Saturday game, and I listened to that in Sacramento, California, on the radio, and Jimmy Quails broke that up, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. After Randy Hundley trying to bunt on him in the ninth inning, got that one, but then Quails just dumped his ball over Harrelson's head in the short left field, and that. It was still a great game, as a lot of Met pitchers have learned about one hitters. Only Santana was able to throw a no hitter, and
that
Joanne has been unseen since.
That came back to hurt him horribly.
There's a two-time Cy Young Award winner.
The other day, there was a Met pitcher that took it.
Stevie Metz.
7, I think.
No, you went into the 8th inning with 1 out.
Yeah, into the 8th with 1 out, 7 and a third. Yeah.
He finished with 1 hitter, though.
That is very interesting. I'm talking to the guy. It ain't over till it's over. He looked at you and said that. Did you write that down right then?
No. Nobody wrote it down because they were a last-place team. If I had written that story, it would have been the last time I wrote about the Mets. I would have been off the beat. Right. And the problem is I was the backup, and so when they did make the move, now some of the beat writers obviously overheard the conversation, and they remembered that when the Mets made the move right after that. But I couldn't write it. It would have really been something if I did, because they wouldn't have published it. It was so silly at the time because they were dead last, and what season's going to be over next month, so it would have been the end of my career right there. I would have been covering hockey instead for the press, all right? It's not so bad.
Did you grow up watching hockey? Speaking of hockey, because I
of
have
course I
New York Rangers in my
I'm a
soul.
New Yorker. Come on. Geo card and 50 cents, and we got into the old Madison Square Garden at the balcony. And
right.
Danny Lewicki was my favorite player.
Who was?
Only hockey team. Danny Lewicki, number 22. I say with Wally Hergesheimer, and of course everybody else rooted for Andy Bathgate, but I had to go the opposite way. Basketball.
Bathgate
I like Jimmy Beckpole of the Knicks.
Played a long time.
Yes, he did.
Bathgate, Prentice, and Ingerfield. How's that for a long?
Oh, Larry Popine.
Right. And Val Fontaine.
Well,
that's a penalty killer. A penalty killer whom I gave my blue. They called it the Blue Book. It was like a little yearbook.
Oh yeah, it was yearbook.
Put out, and I gave it to him, and with an envelope. And before a game, I met him outside the Garden. He was going, and I said, Val, would you be kind enough to get players to sign this and just put it in the envelope with self-address and mail it back to me? He got every New York Ranger at the time, including I blank on his name, the goalie who came over from Montreal.
Well, they had Gump Worsley and they had Johnny Power in net those years.
Yeah, that was a little later. This was a little later.
Eddie Jacquemin was,
Jacquemin, but they got a goalie from Montreal that played without a mask. Jacques Plante is signed in that book. I still have that Blue Book, one of the few
Jake the Snake
pieces of memorabilia I've saved with all the Rangers, Gilbert and Ingerfield and all those guys signing it.
But you'll find hockey guys are the most friendly of all the sports,
Absolutely. I used to go down for autographs.
Easiest ones to get autographs from.
Pardon me? Yes.
Easiest athletes to get autographs from.
Yes, I do. I did the same as a kid. We'd go down to the hotels, and where the visiting players would come in, and hockey players were nice. They were human beings. I attribute it to taking out all their aggression on the ice.
Well, I assumed it was because these were guys mostly from Canada back in those days, and their future was working in the coal mines or something, and this was just, they weren't educated like the players now, and so they were happy to talk to people, so there was less pressure on them. But now it's a different thing. They're all from colleges, and they're all older when they break into the league, unless they're superstars. But of course, the New York Islanders were a team I covered, and those guys were, to me, is the greatest team of all time in the NHL, and go through what they did through those 4 Stanley Cup championships and get to a 5th straight year in 1983 and, 84 right after the Olympics, and Patty LaFontaine and, Flatley joining them. And those guys were so beat up after 5 years in a row of the playoffs. It was, I felt really bad for them, but, Brian Trottier, Mike Bossy, and Bill Smith, and Denny Potvin didn't really get the respect because they played on Long Island instead of New York City. It looks like the Islanders are going to go to Queens, huh?
Yeah.
Change.
That's in all.
They played right near City Field, I guess. But I've never seen City Field, and I probably never will.
Do the Rangers have something to say about that, or are they?
I don't think so.
Okay.
The Islanders were in Brooklyn. I mean, they're still a city. They're still in a borough in New York, so probably not,
That's true. What's changed the most about New York? I'm going back for the first time in 12 years. I don't mean just these past years, but over the years, what do you find the most significant change in New York?
Well, I haven't been there in a couple of years myself. We lived in the Albany area and the Buffalo area, as well as Long Island and the Queens. So, but it's. I try to remember back to high school days. We had Forest Hills was in the PSAL finals in 1957, and the teachers actually took the entire senior class, all 1,400, from the school to the subway at Connell Avenue and let us stay on a train before we got to the old garden. I can't imagine that happening now because the way people are acting out there. But,
right.
Back in the 50s, they could do stuff like that. As far as
it was a good time to grow up, wasn't it? It was a good time to grow up. Were you considered a baby boomer, or were you a little
No,
older?
I'm in the 30s. No. Before World War II.
Okay. This has been terrific. I hope you'll come back sometime and we can talk more.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, Ralph.
I'm glad you liked it,
me.
and man, I'm just tingling because the statement by Yogi, "It ain't over till it's over." I can imagine to be looked at right in the eye when he said that.
Well, it was in the middle of a whole bunch of things, because it isn't like he just said that by itself. I mean, he's talking about players' injuries.
Talking to you, the way he turned around and, he wasn't giving
upset.
up. Yeah, he
didn't want some smart aleck writer telling him what to do out there,
Right.
But thanks for having me on.
Thank you, my friend. I'm going to end the episode just by telling you and everybody else to keep on keeping on, and we'll catch you down the line. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Thank you.
Be well. Shalom. We are back. New York Met baseball, past, present, and future. A little change in programming. I'm Ralph Tyko. My co-host is Marty Rose. We
How's everybody?
How you doing, Mert?
I'm doing fine tonight, Ralph. How are you?
Terrific. We're kind of three-stated. Mert, you're in Florida. I'm in California. And our guest, as far as I know, you're in New York, aren't you? Author Eric Sherman.
I am in New York. And how are you guys?
We're both terrific. What part of New York are you in?
New Rochelle.
A little bit north of the Bronx.
Yeah, very, very little bit. Yeah, in some parts it's the first suburban town north of the Bronx, depending on the border.
If you're a little bit snooty, you're from New Rochelle. If you're down home, you're from the Bronx. It's a big difference. It's the address. Mert's in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm in Alameda, California. And we have a lot of questions. Mert's going to talk to you a little bit about a book that you wrote on a subject that is, of course, near and dear to all of our hearts, the 86 New York Mets. And you wrote a book that has a bit of a different slant. It's what happened mostly after the 86 season. So you and Mert, take it away.
Okay. Well, first I'll just give you a very brief description of the book, and you're correct. It's a different angle that really hasn't been done on the 86 Mets yet. The book Kings of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with the 86 Mets. The title kind of speaks to how this is not just a tale of the 86 season, but also a look at the challenges that so many of these guys have faced, both self-induced and otherwise, since that glorious 86 season, how they're doing today, and also a look back at that magical 86 Mets season. And really, the thing that I want to emphasize besides that is that this isn't just, my traveling 40,000 miles around the country to meet with the Strawberries, the Goodens, and the Dykstras, but also some of the lesser known guys with some of the best stories like Doug Sisk, Ed Hearn, Kevin Mitchell. So it really gives the reader content that they haven't seen before, and it's focused on the key and most riveting guys from that team.
Well, I'll agree with you on Ed Hearn being a terrific interview. We had him a while back on these airways, and what a great guy, what a motivational speaker, and what an example of true grit. He's not had the easiest of times physically, and he's come back and keeps going and keeps strong. And tell me a little bit about your interview with Ed Hearn, and then I'll let Mert take it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great place to start because Ed was the first of the 1486 Mets that I profiled, that I actually went out to see. Ed, at first, was a little bit, how should I say? He wasn't on board right away with the idea. He was skeptical. Yeah, because so much has been written about the 86 Mets as this crazy partying, fraternity type team, and a lot of that's true. But when they would go out, and then when they would stay in the clubhouse after the games and have a few beers, I mean, they would break down games. They were real students of the game, and that's another part of this book that makes it a little bit different. It really focuses on the baseball intellect of these guys. But Ed Hearn, he's lived the life of Job. I mean, he just basically, ever since he left the Mets, it's been one serious health issue after another. Serious stuff, life-threatening diseases.
Kidney stuff, vital organs. We're not talking about spraining an ankle or coming back from a knee.
Exactly.
Really.
And then when one of the reasons I want to go out to visit these guys was also to see where they're living and to meet their families. And in Ed's case, so we just basically gave a 30,000-foot view of his health issues. We didn't really get into how serious they were, but they were. In '86, Ed Hearn marries a nurse, and they're still together today. And I mean, she's a sweet woman, but she's a tough woman also, and she's a nurse. I mean, Ed could not have married anybody better than Trish. And then Ed's only son has had health problems as well. He's had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So the title of the profile that I did on the Hearns was Profiles in Courage, because for the whole time that Ed's been married, and then when his son came along, incidentally, it's his son's 22nd birthday today. They have met the challenges of life, and they have struggled every bit of the way. But they're still here, and they're a real inspiration.
Absolutely, and the way his outlook is as well. He doesn't ask why me, that kind of thing, and that makes a big difference. He's terrific. Mert.
Yeah, that non-Hodgkin's is very tough. My daughter. I don't know if you even know this, Ralph. My younger daughter had that.
I did know that. Yeah, when
her junior year of college, and she got through it. But it was tough, and it wasn't diagnosed right away because she was away at college. She went to one of these places. If you don't have a regular doctor, these are one of these 24-hour places that people go to.
Clinic.
Yeah, you got a sore throat. Here, take this. She comes home. She was not yet 21. She's still going to her childhood doctor. Also, give you some antibiotics, go home, blah, blah. I take her to my doctor, okay, takes one look at her, you're going for a biopsy tomorrow, you know. So this is a very, very tough disease, but you know, if you get it at the right time, you know, it's curable, and I'm glad it was for Ed. But in any case, tell us about some of the other guys that we're not so familiar with on this team, Eric, because like you said, we all know Darryl and we all know Lenny more than we probably would even want to. You know,
most bizarre interview I've ever had was with Lenny. I mean, just absolutely bizarre. I mean, it was really, I mean, he's an entertaining guy. I mean, I'll give him that. And he's always been very friendly with me. But you know, there's a few Lennys there when you're talking to him, you know, there's the astute financial guy. I mean, he can talk the talk of Wall Street for sure. He did really, really well for a time, trading options. Then there is the astute baseball man. He can talk baseball and he's very, very opinionated but he's got a good mind for the game, and the strategies and, you know, hitting approaches, and he'll talk to you about that. And then there's kind of like the surfer dude, psychedelic Lenny, you know, who will out of the blue, he'll just look at you and he'll go, "Are you with me? You know, do you feel me? Do you feel me, Eric? Do you feel me?" You know, like that type of thing. And so, that, you know, I'm actually glad you brought Lenny up because, of course, he has the book out now, and so he's a different kind of cat for sure. But yeah,
I'm feel like he's telling you the truth all the time. Can you trust what he's saying? That's
I could when I was with him. You know, I mean, I know enough about what he was talking about where it would make sense. I mean, he's very opinionated. You know, he's not a big Terry Collins guy, to say the least, and if you read the book, you'll find out why. But he's very opinionated. But do I think he was lying to me about anything? I mean, nothing serious, nothing significant. I mean, was he pulling my leg a couple of times? Sure. But you know, for the serious stuff that we talked about, you know, like with Doc.
Things you said about Davey, for example. Things you said about the
that actually surprised me, because I know that came out in his book, and he had, you know, really nothing but good things to say about Davey when I spoke to him. He basically said that, you know, he and Davey didn't talk much, but, you know, they'd go golfing, and, you know, they would, you know, make some wagers on the golf course. But they didn't talk a lot as manager and player. But I guess about 2 or 3 years ago, they were in a van together, coming back from an autograph signing, and Lenny, said that he and Davey talked the whole way, and it was really cool and great. And then, of course, you know, you pick up Lenny's book, and he trashed Davey pretty bad, I thought.
He did.
You know, and I think he crossed the line on a few things. I mean, everyone knew that Davey liked his cocktails, like the rest of them, pretty much. But you know, to intimate that it affected his managing in any way was, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, Davey's record speaks for itself. He was the best manager I think the Mets ever had, if you look at it statistically, averaged 96 wins a season. But you were about to ask about some of the other guys, you know, like not the main guys, and I'm glad you're asking that, because, you know, you take a guy like Doug Sisk, who I think of the 24-man World Series roster in '86, he's probably the only guy that, you know, that would have to pay for his own drinks in Manhattan now. You know, he just was the kind of guy that was not a popular 86 Met, and that made for a very interesting story because he's the only one from that team that really isn't revered. And my profile with him really got into how unfair that was. Sisk was arguably the Mets' most productive pitcher in '83, and up until that Cubs series in September of '84, he was having an even better year. I mean, this guy had an ERA of under 2, but he developed elbow problems, bone chips in his elbow at the worst possible time. It wasn't diagnosed until midway through the '85 season. So the Mets all of a sudden are this really good team, and Sisk is out there blowing games, not knowing why, knowing that he was in pain, and so I hope the profile that I did with him set the record straight, because Sisk would have had, I think, a terrific career if he didn't get hurt at the worst possible time. And so that's a great story. Kevin Mitchell, the feedback that I get from people is that's people's favorite chapter in the book, just because everyone thought Mitchell was a thug, and he was the reason why Doc and Straw, became bad boys and that type of thing. And so I call that chapter The Thug Who Wasn't. And I start off the chapter saying how Mitchell, when I called him, was tending to his Japanese garden, and helping kids for free at a batting cage. So he might be the most misunderstood New York Met in the history of the organization, and that's why they traded him, because Cashin and some of the others in the front office thought that he'd be a bad influence on the other young stars like Strawberry and Gooden, and that was the furthest thing from the truth. And the players knew it.
I just remember him getting big hits. That's all I remember.
Yeah. He was the MVP 2.5 years later. So.
Yeah.
What about Wally? Famous catch in San Francisco with one hand, with his throwing hands, his right hand, and he's a tremendous hitter. They were so deep. I remember Danny Heap. There'd be a guy that might want to know about, right?
Danny Heap.
Yeah, well, Heap.
Yeah, not another big name.
Right.
No, right. And I profiled him also.
Productive as hell. Very productive.
Yeah, and I profiled him as well. I wasn't going to at first, but I had done I was the co-author of Mookie Wilson's autobiography. So Mookie helped me, get a hold of some of these guys and really to campaign for me a little bit, because, you have to build up trust. You're going to their homes and they're going to entrust you with their deepest thoughts in a book like this. And so Heap wasn't a guy that I really thought of profiling until Mookie started telling me a little bit about him. And, Danny Heap has had a phenomenal college coaching career. He's down in San Antonio, and he's got something like 700 career wins as a college coach. He's turned down, professional coaching jobs and just a really interesting guy. And he's accomplished a lot. And as a major leaguer, all 5 teams he played for all went to the postseason, and that was before the wild card, when it became a lot easier to make the playoffs. He was a winner, and he wanted to win and be on winning teams, and he probably could have been a starter, for 20 of the 26 teams back then. But he just wanted to play for a winner, and he was a really important member of that 86 Mets team.
They went very deep, and he was a good bat off the bench, Tell me if you don't agree with me on this, that getting rid of Ray Knight, in addition to Mitchell, really hurt them quite a bit, more so than just statistically, rotisserie league kind of stuff, but from the standpoint of a team and what Ray Knight meant to the team and the circumstances behind his leaving, the collusion that was going on at the time, which prevented the Mets from signing him to a multi-year contract, which insulted him, and he left, and I wonder if you agree with me on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the surprise of the book to me. Of all the guys that I interviewed, all of them, I don't think I asked Hojo the question, because obviously he replaced Ray Knight.
Yeah.
But this to me was the biggest surprise in the book. To a man, they all said that the biggest reason the Mets didn't win another world championship after '86 was because they didn't bring back Kevin Mitchell and Ray Knight. Now, Kevin Mitchell was a little bit of a surprise because he wasn't a starter yet, and but Ray Knight, I mean, that really surprised me because he was a nice player statistically, 270, 70 RBIs, a nice player, but and he was replaced by Hojo, who would be a 3-time 30-30 guy. Now, what I underestimated was the leadership that Ray Knight brought to that '86 Mets team, and the fight and the intimidation. Really, he and Mitchell, as far as intimidation, and the psychological aspect of the game is far, far more important than the average fan realizes. So even though you're bringing in a Kevin McReynolds to basically replace Mitchell, and McReynolds was the more established player at the time, and then you got a Hojo who was clearly a better hitter than Ray Knight. I mean, a much better hitter, had speed, he was younger, right? Yet those Mets say, you look at the difference between the '87 team and the '86 team. Ray Knight and Kevin Mitchell, losing those guys, teams weren't afraid of us anymore, and that really surprised me. So that's a terrific question, because when I went into this project, I didn't even think of that. I mean, it was just like a throwaway question, and to a man, they're all like, "Oh, yeah, that was the biggest reason why we didn't win again."
Wow. Glad I could tune in on that level, but it seemed pretty obvious, just given the way things went. How about pitching-wise? Anybody on that staff that you talked to that you learned anything from that that surprised you?
Well, I mean, the most interesting of all the pitchers was probably Gooden. I mean, he's such a sweet, emotional guy, and of course, what he's going through now it's just tragic, And
how serious do you think this is? Really serious at this point, or he's putting up what appears to be an addiction face, I call it, where you're in denial.
Yeah.
And I think folks in denial about stuff don't they can't go with the flow if you're denying your existence the way it is. And I'm worried from the standpoint of humanity, let alone a beloved New York Met.
Well, when I met with him, I would say he was 30 pounds heavier than he is now, at least. And I've gotten to know Doc pretty well. We've stayed in touch, and it's just shocking to see him now. And I met with him, I guess about a year ago, and he had lost so much weight, and I asked him how he was doing, and all he could talk about was his mom, and who was the most important person to him in the world, and the closest and the most supportive, and he really leaned heavily on his mom, and his mom was literally at death's door for probably a year and a half. I mean, every time I talked to Doc or ran into him, I'd always ask him how his mother was doing, and his answer was always the same. Well, doctors say that she can go any time, and it's day to day, and it could be any time, and and that wear on him tremendously. And I mean, he's got a drug problem, and once an addict, always an addict, and he can deny, I think, all he wants, but it's pretty clear, that he's using. And
does he get any help? Does
it's
he have counseling at all? Does he go to program AA or drug anonymous? Does he go to any of that?
Yeah. I mean, he has a sponsor that he has to stay in. He's supposed to stay in touch with. I mean, he's done all the steps, and I mean, he's done every program that you can do. But he's addicted, and if you go way back to when he started, and it was he was hooked the very first time he ever tried. Some people can get away with it. They can be a recreational user and then just stop. But in his case, no. I mean, he was hooked right away, and that happens to some people, and it's so tragic because it happened to a pitcher that, for as great as he was at such a young age, I mean, he could have broken every record in the book. And what's also tragic is that it happened to such a wonderful human being. I mean, the sweetest guy. I mean, he just wants to please everybody, and it's just very sad. And and I think what Darryl Strawberry is doing, I think he's showing some tough love. And some of the other 86 Mets are a little bit upset with him right now for bringing Doc into the spotlight. Some of them saying, it's none of his business. He should stay out of it. It's a personal matter. Well, I would say this. Okay, so what happens if we open up the paper tomorrow morning and Doc's gone, and nobody did anything, and nobody brought this to light? Well, then what? You've got to think that whoever his drug dealer is running for the hills right now. So Doc's going to have to face up to this, and and get the help that he needs. And I applaud Darryl Strawberry, for being courageous enough to do this.
Really? Yeah. Wow. Let's move on to, I had some questions about Wally Backman.
Sure.
We think alike, Mert. I can't understand why.
Well,
together,
you hear his name every day. What does Sandy Alderson have against him? This is what I want to know, and why he
doesn't like him.
Even be considered. But personally, or
yeah, I think personally he doesn't like him. I think Sandy Alderson. I think Alderson's a Moneyball guy. And he's from the A's during that Moneyball era, and I think that Sandy feels like the field manager is somewhere around middle management or lower, and he takes orders from the general manager, and I think he understands. I think Sandy is a smart guy, and he understands that Wally is not going to put up with that. That Wally is an old-fashioned manager who doesn't always play by the book. He understands sabermetrics and he uses it, But I think they would clash, and I think Sandy realizes that. And I think what's going to happen is Terry Collins is either going to get fired at the end of this year, or he's going to not get re-signed after next year. I think Sandy, probably because of his health problems, will have to retire either after this year or when his contract is up after the following year. And then Wally might get a shot. But until that time, I would be very, very surprised if you see Wally in Queens.
Okay.
Well,
do you think Dick Scott has a chance at being the manager?
I'm sorry, who?
Dick Scott, the bench coach. Dickie Scott.
Oh, I hope not. I really hope that Wally gets it for the Mets' sake. I mean, what does this guy have to do, really? I mean, he has proven himself again and again at the minor league level. He's won Manager of the Year, for the whole minor leagues twice. He's had, I think, 5 or 6 first-place finishes. And in the book, I asked him the tough questions about his domestic dispute. And Wally's, and we're talking 15, 16 years ago. And apparently what happened, according to Wally, is he came back from a fishing trip with his son, and one of his best friend's wives was in the house with his wife, and his friend and this woman were going through a divorce, and she was talking very badly about his friend. So Wally, defending his friend, says some things maybe he would word a little bit differently if he had a second chance.
Right.
And she allegedly took a baseball bat, his World Series bat, mind you, and hit him in the arm with it and broke his arm. And he showed me the 10-inch scar that he got. I mean, it was a brutal beating. And he was the one that ended up spending the night in jail, apparently. And so he ended up pleading like a no contest and donating I think it was just like $1,000 to a boys club or something like that. And he thought it was over with. Well, he now had a record. And he didn't realize that, and he just wanted the whole thing to go away. And of course, he got hired by the Arizona Diamondbacks back in 2004. And then an article comes out in the New York Times a couple of days later, saying that this is part of what Wally's about. This is how aggressive he is. He had a domestic dispute in his home. And it alleged that it had something to do with his wife, which was unfounded. And if you ask Wally's wife, she would say that's ridiculous, that Wally would never touch her. So this has kept him from managing all these years later.
Baseball bat. His friend's
wife.
Hit him with, it wasn't his wife that hit him with the baseball bat.
No.
Wow, that clears up a lot in my head. Just right there. Why did that should have all been made clear to the Arizona team right there.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, I guess any publicity is bad publicity when you're talking about that at the time.
Yeah, especially these days.
If he had the job and it happened, maybe it would have been different. But he didn't really have the job yet, so they just.
I think he had been hired.
Well, they had a press conference, but they hadn't actually signed the contract. But they agreed on years and money, and Wally said in the state of Arizona, a handshake is binding, and that's what they had. And Wally said that lawyers were lining up to take his case, but he figured that if he attempted to sue the Diamondbacks, then it would hurt his chances of getting another job.
Sure. Wow. What about Timmy Tuffle? Any chance of him moving up a little bit?
Well, the rumor was, it was more than a rumor. I mean, this is the whole story around Wally. You know, the Mets keep making him promises, and then they go back on those promises. So what was supposed to happen a year ago was Wally was going to get the third base coaching job, and Tuffle was going to become the hitting coach. And then they got Long instead, and everybody stayed where they were. They promised Wally a year before that a bench coaching job, and then they took that away. You know, no reason given. It's the most bizarre thing. I mean, all this guy wants to do is manage at the big league level. He is arguably the greatest minor league manager never to have managed in the major leagues. You can make that argument in every single way. And you know, the thing that's forgotten is that on that 25-man Mets roster in the World Series last year, 12 of those guys were guys that Wally helped develop at the AAA level. I mean, Conforto has struggled this year. Some of the other guys have struggled, and you just wonder if things would have been different with Backman. I personally feel
Viola's pitching coach as well.
Yeah, right. I mean, I personally feel the Mets would probably be 5 or 6 games better off with Backman as the manager than with Collins. I mean, it's my opinion. I think the guy's just a better field manager. I mean, it's no knock on Collins. I just think that Backman is the better baseball guy from a manager standpoint.
Well, I'd like to see it from a fan standpoint. It's just seems like it would be right, in the line of things as things go. How ill is Alderson now? I know he's been suffering from leukemia, if I'm not mistaken.
Did he have prostate cancer? What did he have? Was it prostate cancer?
I'm not sure, but I know he has a form of cancer. They haven't really talked much about it, so I don't really want to speculate. But I have to think that the next year would be his last year. I mean, he's 67. It's gonna be 68 next year, and I mean, for a healthy 68-year-old, that's typically the end of the, close to the end of the line.
Yeah.
To be a general manager.
Well, Mert, how do you feel this morning at age 69?
I feel fine. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm not a general manager.
Well, that's true. How about for a retiree? We're both doing pretty good for retirees, Eric. But and they say,
I'll
69
tell you,
69 is the new 67. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the general manager's job is nothing like it used to be. I mean, it's nothing like it was in the Gabe Paul era, when general managers, they worked 8-hour days and they made deals over glasses of scotch and that type of thing. I mean, those days are long over. I mean, now GMs, they're coming out of the Ivy League. They're in their 30s now, and they're all over the place. I mean, it's a very different job now, and I think the Alderson. I'd be very, very surprised if he continued after next year.
Eric, did you know? God, I blank on his name. Murdy went to Newtown and he was the general manager before Alderson. God.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, 69 isn't too old. Maybe we'll play checkers later. In the park.
Yeah, I know who you mean, Ralph. I'm
you
sure
know what I mean.
Eric knows who you mean also. The guy that's responsible for like half the guys on the team right now.
Bail us out.
You're thinking of Omar Minaya.
Omar.
Thank you. He went to
Omar
our high
Minaya.
school.
Yeah.
In
Oh,
Queens.
okay.
Yeah. Tell me, did he get a real raw deal? What were the circumstances behind his being replaced?
Oh, I think it was a combination of things. You know, I mean, he made some great deals that he really didn't see the fruition of. But I think the whole thing with Alderson coming in was because the Wilpons had to do it. I mean, you know, I don't have proof of this, but in my opinion, the commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig, said to the Wilpons, look, this whole Bernie Madoff thing, it's a mess. You know, you've lost, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. The thing is just a disaster. If you want to keep the Mets, you're going to have to become extremely fiscally responsible. And that's why he brought in, you know, they basically hired a Moneyball guy in Sandy Alderson, who would be able to be a general manager, and act like a GM of a small market team, unfortunately in the biggest market in the country, and be able to work with, you know, a $70 million payroll instead of a $200 million payroll. And I think that's what probably saved the Wilpons, is that they had to agree to this. Again, I have no proof of this, but Minaya seemed to be doing a fine job. But they bring in Alderson because they had to cut the fat, and they had to become fiscally responsible and work within their means. And Alderson's very good at that. You know, I mean, as far as the trades that he's made, I think some of them have been really lucky. You know, I mean, getting Cespedes last year with what Kelly Johnson has now done twice. I mean, Cologne, I mean, that was amazing. You know, but, I mean, I'll give him credit, for getting Syndergaard, you know, but I mean.
They developed that pitching staff, that minor league pitching staff. That's part of the general manager's duties, is to head up a staff of player development and draft and what have you, scouting. Got to give him credit for that. Yeah. He brought in Podesta and a whole bunch of guys that turned him around. I wonder if Selig had the foresight to look at it the way you say he did and identify what's his name? Wilponzi? Oh, no. Identify him the way he is. How come he chose him as the head of the finance committee in Major League Baseball? That blew me away.
I'm really not sure.
Yeah, and I went to Newtown, so I have some credibility. Do you know that I was a super senior, Eric?
No.
No. Yeah. Okay. Hey, you've been terrific. Mert, anything else you want to ask that may make sense more so than my questions?
I think we pretty much covered. Unless there's any other. I want to ask Eric how he became a Met fan, and who took him to his first game. Was it in Queens at Shea? What's that about?
Well, to tell you the truth, I grew up liking both teams in New York, the Mets and Yankees. I've actually written four books. I wrote a book on Glenn Burke, who played for the Dodgers and the A's. I wrote a book with Steve Blass, who was the Pittsburgh Pirates pitcher, and so I really, for many years now, I've been more of a baseball fan since I started writing books. My niche really is focusing on great baseball stories that transcend the sport, and certainly the '86 Mets qualify, and Mookie Wilson certainly qualified.
I can't let you go. You mentioned Glenn Burke, and just last night I was doing an interview on this network on the Peter Golenbach show, and the name Tommy Lasorda came up, and right away I identified Lasorda as the man who turned his son came out as being gay and was having some sort of friendship with Glenn Burke, and Tommy Lasorda disowns his son because he was gay, so automatically goes down as one of the biggest scumbags in the history of baseball.
Now, was Lasorda on Golenbach's show, or? No,
but that I was on.
It came up.
We were talking together, and that happens to be true. And I wonder how much of stuff like that Glenn Burke shared with you for his book.
All of it. I mean, to be very frank about it, the interview was conducted over a week and a half for his autobiography. He was on his deathbed, dying of AIDS. And when you're in that position, you have really no incentive other than to tell the truth. And a documentary was done after my book with Glenn, with teammates like Reggie Smith, Davey Lopes, and so forth, and they all Dusty Baker, and they all backed up 100% everything that Glenn said about Lasorda and the Dodgers, and it's it's sad. I mean, he was clearly blackballed from the game. Once they found out that he had developed this relationship with Spunky Lasorda, they traded him to the Oakland A's for an aging Billy North, and Glenn Burke was this young rising star in the Dodgers organization, and as you know, back in those days, the Dodgers were churning out one rookie of the year after another, and Burke was going to be their center fielder for the next 15 years. And but he went to a wasteland in Oakland, and the A's were awful back in the late 70s. They called them the Triple A's, and a couple of years later, he was out of baseball. It's just a very sad story.
His daughter is a world-class athlete, if I'm not mistaken. Did he talk about that, or am I confusing him with someone else?
I'm sorry. Whose daughter?
Glenn Burke's daughter.
Oh, Glenn never had children.
Then I'm confusing him with someone else, but that's apt to happen at late in the day as it is for we retired folk. This was fun. You'll come back. I make him laugh. 64 years of doing that. He's the only one that laughs. Eric, did you have a good time, and would you come back someday and entertain us again?
Of course. No, Beautiful. This has been great.
All right.
Enjoyed it, Eric. Thank you.
Tell the folks before we go where you get your book and the exact name of it. King of Queens.
It's Kings of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with the '86 Mets. It's published by Penguin Random House, and you can get it anywhere books are sold. And if you have Amazon Prime, all the better. you'll get your discount on it, and I think it's 1-day shipping. So, that's a good way to get it.
Terrific. Thank you guys both. I really enjoyed this one, as I do most of them, if not all of them.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
All right. And I'll end the show the way I always do. Keep on keeping on, everybody. See you next week. Adios.